Good evening and welcome to the Arundel Camera Club live stream for Wednesday, September 30th, 2020. My name is John Milliker and I'm the club president for the 2020-2021 season. The Arundel Camera Club was founded in 1957 and exists to promote the art, science, and education in all aspects and fields of photography. Normally we meet at 7 p.m. every Wednesday evening during the school year in Severna Park, Maryland. However, with the current COVID situation, we've decided to continue business as normal in a virtual space, which allows us to protect our members and guests. For more information about us, please visit www.arundelcameraclub.org. Before we get to tonight's topic, we have a few announcements to cover. On October 7th, we have a photo assignment from September. That is your favorite drinks. The deadline for that is tonight. We're going to extend that until about midnight. Look for an email as we put them up for voting this week, and then we will have that photo assignment scheduled on next Wednesday. Then we have Don Rosenberg on October 14th for abstract photography. October 17th, we have a field trip to the Spokore Windmill in Cambridge, Maryland. Look for an email for that. October 21st, we have digital color and monochrome contest with the theme of patterns. On October 22nd, that's a Thursday, we have our fundraiser with the Brian Baru. Remember, you don't need to be there. You can actually order this menu for takeout, and I believe that is from 4 to 10. Hopefully someone can let us know if that's not correct in the chat. Then on October 29th, we have Steve Hain, who is a historian of daguerreotype and wet plate photo cases, and he will talk about how he's been recreating these beautiful antiques for modern practitioners. Now for tonight's presentation, we have our own Brian Flynn. Brian and his wife Donna have been active members of the Arundel Camera Club for many years. They both compete in the Unlimited category. Brian has published 3 books that combine photography and inspirational text. He's discussed those and the development in an earlier program at the club. In his other life, Brian is an associate director for health systems at the Center for the Study of Traumatic Stress in the Department of Psychiatry at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences in Bethesda, Maryland. In recent months, he has been active in teaching, training, writing, and consulting in the U.S. and internationally on the psychosocial aspects of the current COVID-19 pandemic. Prior to joining CSTS, the Center for Study of Traumatic Stress, he served for 31 years as an active duty commissioned officer in the U.S. Public Health Service. Among his other responsibilities, he directed the federal government's domestic disaster mental health program for many years. In 2002, he retired as a Rear Admiral and Assistant Surgeon General. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you.
I'm going to just listen to make sure we have you here.
Okay, can you hear me and see me okay?
I have you here. I'm just going to keep an eye on the stream.
Okay. You just tell me when you want me to start talking.
Perfect. We have you, Brian. We are doing good. The reason I checked with that is as a lot of our people know, we have a new mixer. We bought the new mixer. We sent it back. We got it back. We sent it back in. So we are on the old mixer again. So I just need to make sure that we are good to go, Brian. I've got your lovely face on the screen a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about this bio that I read for you? That I read terribly because you have a lot of big words there. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I can sum it up by saying I made a career out of going to the nicest places at the worst possible times.
Wow.
I've done a lot of things in my career, but my real passion has been stress and trauma of large-scale disasters. Early in my career, that was primarily natural disasters, but increasingly toward the end of my public health service career, it became terrorism and bioterrorism with the anthrax attacks. And since I've left active duty, as you mentioned, I've been affiliated with the Uniformed Services University in Bethesda. That's the military medical school that's part of the Department of Defense. And I'm in the Center for Studies of Traumatic Stress. And so I work there about half time. Now I decided that I didn't want to really retire, but I wanted to do other things like music and photography and being with my family, and decided, in 2000, to retire and rebalance my life. So I'm still very active professionally and very active in all my other activities. So far the balance has worked quite well, and I know I'll be talking about this a little bit. I was thinking back before tonight. I really haven't been active in the club since January, and there's probably a lot of reasons for that, some of which we may explore tonight. But it's good to be back, and I have no visibility on who else is out there as part of this, but I'm assuming that it's some of my old buddies and some new people. So it's very nice to be back. Thank you, John.
We've got a great group for tonight, and that is always fascinating, Brian. I always love hearing about everything that you've done, and tell us a little bit about what you're going to be speaking with us tonight on, and just let me know when you want me to go over to your screen.
Yeah, why don't you pull up the screen, John, and let me know when that's okay, and we'll go from there.
That is up. You're going to see a little thing on the bottom that says stop sharing. You're going to
Yeah.
don't click that. Click on the hide, and that will make your screen nice and full sized. And we have you up. You're ready to go.
Okay, great. Well, I was glad to be asked to do this presentation. It caused me to think a lot, to reflect a lot, and to try to organize something for the group that might be helpful. Since we did talk about my current employment, I feel compelled to share a disclaimer that I do in all my presentations, that what you're going to hear tonight is only my ideas and thoughts and perspectives, and that doesn't really at all reflect policy or positions of the university or the Department of Defense. Before I go into the presentation, I'd like to say a bit about the club. Actually, this is my third program with the club, and I used this slide in the last one, but I think it's worth repeating. This club has meant a great deal to me in a lot of respects. It has improved my photography immensely. It has put me in contact with a lot of wonderful people who are amazing sharers. I haven't met anybody who's unwilling to share their expertise and perspectives and help me, and that's one of the nice things about the culture of this club. So this is really more just an affirmation from my old friends there, but an introduction for folks who might be new, that you can get a great deal out of this club. I've learned a lot from the programs. The judging has been phenomenal. I've learned so much when I've submitted images. As I mentioned, the relationships are very supportive. This is the best kind of competition as far as I'm concerned. It's taken very seriously by the club, by the judges, by we who submit, and it can be intimidating if you're new. It took me a long time to actually submit things for competition, but it has proved to be a very safe place to take creative and ego risks. I included this image down here because I'm still pissed off about it. 99% of the judges are great, but that 1% every once in a while bites you, and I just had to in a humorous vein, put this one in. We had a category of street photography, and I submitted this image here, and the judge disqualified it, eliminated it, because it didn't actually show a street. So that was one of the most egregious examples of bad judging that I saw, but I want to assure you that's the outlier, not the norm. But I guess I just got to let it go. The plan for this evening, first of all, is I'd like it very much to be interactive. So what I'm going to be doing is presenting some slides and then pausing the slides and taking them down and getting involved, hopefully with a discussion. with all of the folks who are here. I'll take the liberty of or the risk of talking about some of the things that I want the group to talk about my own experience with that, and hopefully that kind of self-disclosure will encourage other people to talk. When I was asked to put the program together, I started thinking, well, how do we have a rich discussion about photography in a time of chaos and crisis? And my thought was that we really can't have the richness of the discussion I would like without laying a foundation about what's going on right now and how people are reacting to it. And I thought if we build a little bit of a foundation with that to start with, then that will lead us into the discussion of photography that hopefully will be a little better informed by the world around us. So I hope you don't feel like it's bait and switch. We'll get to the photography stuff, but if you'll indulge me, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the foundational issues. So we're going to talk about what's going on in the world today, why it's so distressing for people, what kind of the range is of individual and collective response. This is my work. So I'll be sharing a few slides that I use in my trainings, my professional trainings and consultations. I've taken the logos off of it, but you'll be getting some of the material that I actually present to folks around the world on this. And then we'll get into what's all this mean for photography. And as I thought about that, I thought maybe that kind of chunked itself naturally into three different areas: the actual doing of photography, the activity of being a photographer, and talk about that some, and then talk about the content of the photography and whether what's going on in the world has changed or ought to change that, and then explore some strategies to keep us all invested and passionate and committed. So that's kind of the plan for this evening. I'm going to start with this one. This is a drawing, a graphic that I developed fairly early, probably in March of the pandemic. And I was trying to capture why this feels so different and why this really is so different than other kinds of stressors and disasters and crises we've had. And this, I hope, kind of portrays it. One of the reasons that this is so anomalous and novel for us is that this kind of interaction has seldom taken place before, certainly not in my lifetime. We have the issues of the pandemic, which is talked about all the time, and the stressors that go with that. And by the way, ignore the white text below the yellow. I teach and address a lot of systems people, and that is what I'm trying to portray is the different systems that have responsibility for dealing with this, and what a challenge that is when you try to get health systems involved with emergency management, et cetera. But we've got the pandemic that we all hear about probably more than we want to. There are natural disasters going on. And unless you've been totally isolated, from media, that there are wildfires in the West, a very active hurricane season, other kinds of disasters going on. We also have an economic crisis going on, which is causing all kinds of financial, occupational, vocational problems for people. We have political upheaval unlike anything I have ever seen. And I'm one of the old guys. This is not, I will not get into any partisan kinds of issues. This really is because the tension, the stress, the anger, the division is unavoidable, regardless of what side you might be on. In some ways, I don't want to infantilize the population, but in some ways, it feels a little like being in a family where the parents are fighting and abusing each other. And regardless of who's right and who's wrong, there's an environment that's just really toxic and upsetting and stress producing. So we've got the political factors going on. And then there's civil, social unrest, different issues about justice, those kinds of things. And actually, I think I'm probably going to redo this slide and add another circle that intersects here, and that would be climate change. That is related to a number of these issues and may not appear in our conscious as an acute issue as some of these others, but I believe it's there. And a couple of things, if that wasn't complicated enough, what seems to be happening is that all this together seems to challenge our basic values of what does caring mean in this? What does equity and justice mean? What does social and community connectedness mean in this? So it's challenging our notions and definitions that get to some of our basic values. And if you wanted to make this a three-dimensional diagram, one of the things that makes it so stressful is we really don't understand much about the interactive effects of these concentric circles. And we sure don't know how long this is going to be, how long it's going to last. One of the things I've learned in a career of disaster is that people can take a lot as long as they know when it's going to be over. That certainly has been true of me as somebody who's responded to a lot of disasters. That response is meaningful, but and very rewarding, but stressful at the same time. And one of the things that has always helped me is having some notion about when I'm going to go home again, when I'm going to go back to a normal environment. And I can take a lot as long as I can see that there's an end point. You can't see that in this situation. And I think that adds to the stress. So I hope that presents some kind of context for you. I pulled this off of Facebook a couple of days ago. It's a less academic way of saying what I just said. This guy is just trying to balance and juggle and hang on to a whole lot of different balls that are being piled upon him. So same message, different format. So how do people respond when something like this happens? And this is, again, a diagram that people on my team have used for a long time, and I thought it might be worth sharing. When we think about psychological, behavioral responses to disasters and pandemics, certainly when we do it in the mental health field, we think about psychiatric disorders, primarily PTSD, depression, anxiety, complicated grief, those kinds of things. And those things are real, but they tend to be the smallest of the consequences, and they are limited. What often happens with that is we have a change in health risk behaviors that tend to determine whether we place ourselves at more or less risk. So we may see things like alcohol, tobacco use, prescription medications in ways that aren't healthy, family distress, interpersonal conflicts, work-life balance, this whole thing of restricted activities and travel. I mean, that is something that I think has happened to all of us. It's happened to the country. In some ways, that's a health risk behavior that reduces risk. At the same time, not being able to do that for many of us has been a stressful factor. What is probably most common is a number of distress reactions, sleep difficulties, decreased sense of safety, somatic symptoms, irritability, anger, distraction, isolation. And I'm going to talk about those in a little bit more. But we also have resilience. One of the things that attracted me to disaster mental health and behavioral health probably 40 years ago was that when I went to sites of disasters, what people were experiencing weren't what I was taught in school. I was taught in psychological training to diagnose and treat disorders. And as I said, while that is appropriate, the real story of my experience in disaster behavioral health is resilience. I sometimes do a lecture of 10 lessons learned in a career of disaster mental health. And number one is the resilience of the human spirit. So I don't think we can, and I don't ever want us to have a discussion about stressors and adverse reactions without acknowledging and celebrating the resilience that we need to value and look for and focus on. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a sense of the range of reactions that people have. And this is another slide that I use frequently because people often don't understand this, particularly in a situation where there's a large number of injuries and death and illness. And that is that the psychological footprint is always greater than the medical footprint. And, that may not be a way that you think about it, but you think about the horror of over 200,000 COVID-19 related deaths in this country and recognize the psychological footprint that goes so far beyond that in the tens of millions. So that's one of the reasons why I and my colleagues are so passionate about making sure that this gets addressed. The focus often tends to be on the medical consequences, the medical footprint, and that is valid, that is necessary. But I think it's important to keep in mind that other responses of a psychological nature are far more prevalent. So what happens to us given all this? Why do we have this pervasive sense of disequilibrium? And I use that word disequilibrium intentionally. It's one that came out of some early discussions at one of our center meetings. And that was the acknowledgement that so many of us are feeling and witnessing something that's different. Our lives have changed, our perceptions, so many things about us that I'm about to talk about have changed here. And it's given us, it's not a clinical kind of situation that's diagnosable, but it's something else. And we were trying to describe this and put a label on it. And the best we could come up with was there's a sense of disequilibrium, that things are out of balance. And it was interesting because as we talked about this, one of the things that we realized is this is the kind of thing that we often hear from people in the military who come back from deployments. This is a sense they feel that is basically disequilibrium. Their roles in their environment have changed. The environment that surrounds them has changed. And it takes a while to get used to this, and people feel off balance. And it certainly is what I've experienced in the disaster world when disaster workers like myself come back from the field and come back to our normal workplace and our families. There is quite a sense that where the gears don't fit nicely. So what I wanted to do is just, again, to give us some examples so that we can examine whether you and I have experienced these kinds of things or how we've experienced them in the discussion. Spend a little bit of time on this. There are physical impacts, change in eating. It's now notorious now, the COVID weight gain that's going on. Changes in exercise. I highlighted sleeping in here because, again, in my view, I think it may be one of the most important things that's happening to so many of us. To back up just a little bit, the literature is finding that sleep and the lack of sleep is a major contributor to all kinds of physical and psychological problems. That said, one of the first signs of stress from many people is some kind of sleep disturbance. And just to give you an example of, in the disaster situation, when people are given medications, it's typically not an anti-anxiety or antidepressant medication, it's sleep medication, because people can handle a whole lot more if they're sleeping well. And what's happening increasingly now is that people are not sleeping well, and that's coming to uh, uh, show itself in lots of different kinds of problems. There's psychological issues, anxiety, depression, obsessive kinds of activities, fears, phobias, grief. That's a topic that I and my colleagues at the center are focusing heavily on, is this whole issue of grief. And what are the different kinds of grief? When does normal grief become abnormal? And one of the things that we've been interested in is what's called disenfranchised grief. And that's grief that occurs but isn't validated, isn't recognized, isn't ritualized. And so we feel that we are alone in our grief. There was a lot of that during the heavier lockdown periods where people had relatives who were dying in the hospital. They couldn't be there for them. They couldn't gather with their families for support. We heard it a lot from healthcare workers who were overwhelmed, overworked, at risk, had patients dying, and never had an opportunity to grieve that. So disenfranchised grief is a very specialized kind of grief. We actually kind of got into it when a group of children of Vietnam veterans came to us and asked for some help about this, because they felt they were experiencing this disenfranchised grief, the grief of a parent who was killed in Vietnam, and how they were rejected by society and vilified. And these children felt that they really never had a chance to grieve properly through that. We've also just informally started talking about something called Disenfranchised Joy. That basically there's situations that people are experiencing now where they're robbed of the opportunity for some of the most joyous occasions of life. Weddings can't take place. People can't attend weddings that do take place. People can't go to their proms. People can't go to the graduation ceremonies. These very joyous milestones in people's lives are being ripped away from us. So, there's probably a better way of saying it, but you can think about it as disenfranchised joy. There's a bunch of social issues of isolation, loneliness, this notion of the other, and that we have to be careful of the other, afraid of the other. A lot of spiritual crises, stresses occurring with people when their worship is disrupted. Things like marriages and funerals that typically have a major spiritual religious overlay. The vocational changes that we're all experiencing, the changing nature and location of work, unemployment, etc. And then there's this existential impact that many of us are feeling. Can I or my family, my community, my country, can we go on? How do we go on? What will the results be? And can life ever get back to some, quote, normal keel again? This is another slide that we typically use at work that I'll just mention. And this is typically used when training about natural disasters, and particularly working in natural disasters. But I think it has some interest and value here. Typically, we think about a disaster as a time-limited event. It can be as short as seconds in an earthquake. It can go on for weeks in a slow-rising flood, etc. This disaster is going on and on and on, and will be. So some of the notions of pre-disaster moving into disaster versus post-disaster, those lines are a little less blurred. They're a little more blurred than they are in this diagram. But there are pre-event characteristics of individuals and communities that determine whether people are at psychological risk. There are certain things during an event that seem to influence the risk of adverse outcomes. And then some of the things that happen after disasters, typically like financial hardships and job loss and change in leadership, inability to recover. So that's just a way of showing you what typically happens in a disaster and how much more complicated it is in this situation. So after this, I'm going to ask that John take down the slides for a minute, but I thought we'd have a discussion now. And as I said at the start, I'll share some of my experiences and hope that it'll make you feel more comfortable in talking about your experiences in here. So far, my personal experience has been complicated. I've had a lot more professional work than I have had in a long time. And for me, it's both a curse and a blessing. I feel so fortunate to have knowledge and skills and a forum with which I can share and be helpful. Many people don't have that, and I feel very fortunate that I'm still able to do that. At the same time, as I said, my job is typically about half-time. Beginning in March, for about 3 to 4 months, I was working more than full-time with that, and that really was uncomfortable because it was nights and weekends, and because of some of the international work, I was having to have meetings in the middle of the night because of time changes. So that increase in work was both rewarding and extremely stressful for me. I've had this pervasive subclinical depression. I just haven't been able to regain my old energy back. I'm more easily tired. My motivation is hard. I have to stay motivated for my work and other projects that I'm involved with, for my family's activities, and it's hard for me to maintain that. I find myself having concentration problems. I sometimes have experienced something, this is the fancy name, anhedonia, and it means that you just can't get excited and happy about things. I'm usually a pretty upbeat, cheerful guy, and I found it increasingly difficult sometimes to find joy, no matter how hard I try. And then there's been what I've called for myself this lure of mindlessness. There are times when I just don't want to concentrate on my work or my photography or my music or anything. I just want to lay in front of the TV and binge watch Schitt's Creek. That it's just want to be involved in mindless behavior, and I don't usually do that. One of the things that has been, I think, hardest for me is that there's been a severe reduction in my physical exercise and fitness. I typically do a lot of bike riding. I haven't done that. The exercise health club I belong to, I won't go into. Haven't been into it since January, and I've paused my membership there. It's too risky an environment for me to take. I could exercise. That I don't have to do those things, but I find it very hard to do. And so my physical conditioning, my physical strength, found going down. I've found changes in social patterns here, particularly with family. Some of that's by necessity, not by desire. And I've found myself increasingly isolated and withdrawn. I'm not a person who has a lot of social needs to start with. Donna, those of you who know her, does. She is far more social than I am. It's taken a harder toll on her, not being able to gather with her friends. And then kind of an emotional liability of going from one emotion to the other, in kind of unexpected ways. You get angry more easily when I don't expect it. And then, a few minutes later, I'm just washed over by a sense of gratitude of how much I and my family have and how we haven't been adversely affected like others. And I feel guilty about not doing enough, those kinds of things. So those are some of my negative experiences with this. And John, if you want to take this slide down now, we can go to a more general discussion basically about what has this experience been for you. Have you experienced, as I promised, we'll get to the photography stuff, but I thought it might be interesting and helpful to share some of our experiences together.
Okay, Brian, you're up now. Kathleen says in the chat, she says, Brian, I've just completed a research study examining the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on healthcare staff and perceived anxieties specific to COVID and relationship to other factors. Disenfranchised grief would have been interesting to study, she said.
Yeah, it's hard to study, and there's not much study there about it. We're actually engaging in some of that with healthcare workers ourselves. We ought to talk.
Yeah. Please go ahead and write what your experience has been in the chat. I will let you know what my experience has been. I try to look at the silver lining because I try to be the upbeat guy as well, Brian. But it's really kind of gotten me more into social, where I don't typically work my photography socially online, but it's given me that push to bring some of my alternative stuff and my historic stuff online that I've known I've needed to do for a while, and that's been difficult.
It's difficult, but it's positive.
It is, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a good observation, and that's again one of the things I don't want us to lose.
Right.
Is that even some of the things that are uncomfortable and stressful may have a positive outcome.
And it would have been, as you said, it would have been easy to just sit on the couch and eat Cheetos and watch TV. Okay, let's see if we have anybody. Please share your experiences with us. There's no wrong answer. It's interesting, and when Brian decided to do this talk, he really wanted to get an idea of what other people were doing, and we can also help each other out by knowing what each other does. I know Christine has been trying to do a lot of that stuff as well, and stay positive. She's been trying to organize more and get into some of the hobbies she's put aside for a while, because there's too much out there. If you just glue yourself to social media and listen to, I guess, the wrong things, it can drive you crazy. Mary Lou says, I get so anxious that my blood pressure goes up and my body shakes. I'm so worried about the direction of the country and the future of my children and grandchildren.
Well, join the club. As I said, I don't think I could have done the work that I've done professionally without being optimistic. And it's not Pollyannish. I see things getting better after that, but I'll confess it's hard to maintain in this. This whole thing about questioning our values and meaning, and it's very hard, particularly when it's hard to see an end. This isn't something that's temporary. And, we know that, stress that's ongoing is very debilitating. And you point out a very common issue of, physical ramifications of this. And so I just had an appointment with my primary care doc a few days ago. And it was interesting because it almost turned into a therapy session with him because he has primarily a geriatric patient population, and people he cares about deeply are very sick, and some have died, and it's very hard for him to watch that. But we talked about, even in my case, there are physical consequences of what's here. And, my only, I want this to be a discussion, not recommendations, but I'm going to make an unsolicited recommendation that everybody keep monitoring that kind of stuff because it's real. stress does impact physiology. And we all have to monitor those kind of factors very carefully.
Gotcha.
Thanks for sharing that. I know these things are sometimes difficult to share, and I don't want people to feel compelled to share more than they're comfortable with. So I'm ready to go on anytime. If there aren't any more comments, I'd also be very glad to continue the conversation.
Yeah, she says, I feel I just have to accept what's happening. Um, so what do you think about that? Does I guess she needs to accept what's happening, but you need to kind of hope that that we're all, no matter what side of the spectrum we're on, we all want what's good for our future, right?
Yeah, and a lot of, you know, there's a lot of things that are unknown. Unknown is stressful. The only thing I can recommend, and we'll talk later about, how you might do that with photography. But as tough as it is, we really do need to find ways of keeping perspective. And that's going to vary from individual to individual. I know for me, I've spent a lot more time inside than I usually do. And I've realized how much of just being outside keeps things in perspective for me. It makes me think about other things. It makes me pay attention to other things. And, those of you who know Donna and me know that we go to Canada for several months in the summertime. And that is a major positively balancing experience in our lives. And we can't do that. The border's closed. That's where I do most of my best photography. That's where I do singing and performing a lot. That's where I am most social. And that has been robbed from me. So I have tried to find other ways to compensate for that. But, keeping perspective and finding things to do that help keep things in perspective is a major opportunity, and it's a full-time job. It's not something that you can let go. I'm sure you know or can learn about how to physiologically de-stress in these situations. That's not my area of expertise, but there are ways of coping, and that really is what it is. It's not solving. It's not denying, it's coping and trying to maintain hope. The reality is this will be over. At least the COVID part of it's going to be over at some point. I personally don't think it's going to be in an accelerated time schedule like some people believe. I think we're in this, probably, before things have, semi-normal, probably, almost another year or so. And that's hard to imagine, but it will end. I think that reality is something that we need to keep in mind in our darkest hours.
That's good. That's good, Brian. Susan writes, we live in a community where we know dozens of our neighbors, and it was safe and easy to take a long walk quite often. Just seeing others, having a brief chat from a safe distance did a lot to reinvigorate the spirit.
That's great. I've done that too. I live in a similar community where actually there's been a lot of turnover, so I don't know a lot of the people. We're some of the older people in the community, but I take walks regularly. It is a physical exercise. The weather's been nice, and the hot days I've gone out before it's too hot and humid to enjoy it. And I've done the exact same thing that you talk about, and it's really helpful. I'm getting to know people I didn't know, and they don't have to be long, in-depth conversations, but just that human contact is very nice. And I encourage people who are in living situations where they can do that. Those kinds of things hit a number of these factors: socialization, exercise, being outside. It's better than spending the day in front of the TV.
Right. Chuck says, I've had 2 international trips canceled this year. While they've technically been postponed, for I wonder if that for of travel will ever be the same. I'm missing a word here. He's wondering if that far out maybe travel will ever be the same.
That form of, it's hard to tell. Certainly, it's an impact now. I think the whole nature of I don't know whether he's talking about personal travel or work travel. The nature of professional work is changing. For many occupations, having a workplace, having conferences, having meetings are maybe never going to come back like they were. I mean, if they do, they are going to be very different. I suspect that we will have the kind of, I attend meetings and conferences all the time now, but it's like this. It's not traveling. I think, some of the global epidemiology is going to dictate that, whether it is safe to go from one environment to another, or when is it safe? How is it safe? As I mentioned, I can't go to my home in Canada. The border's closed. They just closed it for another month through the end of October. Then it'll probably go on until the spring. That's a first world problem. Let me first say that. But it's very disappointing, personally. Of course, the government of Canada did let my check for my property taxes come in, even though they wouldn't let me come in.
Wow.
But who knows? The other factor, and I feel compelled to say it just because of my experience so far, is that the world is not looking positively on the United States right now. I think when those of us who like and have engaged in a lot of international travel, at least right now, there's a lot of strong negative feelings. And I have found that in my international consultation. I have had to be very careful that I don't come off as the American having all the answers, when if I did that, I would get a firestorm back, given how poorly we have managed this as a country. So there's a lot of very angry countries out there, and how and when that will correct itself, I don't know. But I have experienced that just in the computer meetings and consultations, that it's an area I've had to be very careful of.
Kathleen says, I've struggled with lack of my daily structure. I too have felt low energy, mood, and being unfocused. She's very thankful for her research studies and work. They give her purpose.
Exactly. And I think, that's part of the preview of things to come. I think, that's one of the roles photography can play. I've felt identically, even though I've found myself having concentration problems and distractibility, my work has been a godsend with this, because it's important and it's meaningful. Other things that I'll talk about have been the same way. But I think we have to find and latch on and hold close those kinds of things that really provide a counterbalance for these kinds of negative emotions and consequences that we've been talking about.
Gotcha. We've got 5 more. Greg says, we tend to think of disasters at the macro level, hurricane, wildfires, etc., but much of what you're saying applies to the micro individual level, loss of a job, an ill relative, and things like that.
Right. I think that's one of the challenges in this, is we see it everywhere. In disaster situations, when life was at normal, you could watch TV and feel very badly about a wildfire in California, but your life was okay here in Maryland. But now, we see it everywhere. Escaping that reality is difficult. One of the things I've tried to do, I'll be honest, only with partial success, is try to reduce my exposure to some of the more global more national kinds of things that are going on. I've tried to watch less TV because it just raises my blood pressure when I do that. I can only do that to a certain extent. I'm certainly not experiencing the level of exposure to the consequences of COVID that a primary healthcare provider or hospital worker would be experiencing. But I'm talking about this. I'm reading about it. I'm writing about it every day, and that's exposure. So one of my comments is reduce your exposure to the things you can, because increased exposure seldom has a positive outcome. Good observation, Greg.
Kathy says, I decided to stop working after being in the same office for 24 years. I've had no closure because I left in March, not realizing I would never be back. I have realized a positive side to it as I have invested my newfound time in helping virtual schooling for their granddaughters.
Yeah, that's great. You've made a couple of points here that I think are really important. The fact that you never got a chance to say goodbye or go through those rituals, that's disenfranchised grief. Anytime we leave a situation that has been rewarding to us and are not allowed to go through the process and the rituals that attend those kinds of things, there's going to be a loss. And it's just wonderful that you have found a way to re-engage in a very positive way, in a way that you're making a serious difference. I'm sure it's wonderful for the kids, and it's definitely wonderful for the parents. Donna and I have said, I don't know how many times, and I'm glad we're at the age where we don't have young children at home or going to school. Those are some of the toughest things that people are facing. So recognize that you actually have probably had a grief reaction about leaving work, but you found some way to counterbalance that. That's wonderful. Helps you, helps everybody.
Jackie says she can relate to the feelings of mild depression, just wanting to sit and stare. She fights the fact that her personality and life experiences have not led her to be Pollyannish. I have also had to deal with my husband's surgery and at one point the possibility of his loss. That is thankfully now not an issue, but to deal with a lot of this, I have severely cut back on social media and mass media consumption, finding that she is needing more sleep, trying to get it, and allowing herself to take more time to complete projects, and physically trying to make herself do Tai Chi practice as a must-do.
Good for you.
Right.
Good for you. You've made, I think, two important points. One is that there's not one solution out of this. You got to do a number of things. There's not a magic bullet or a magic wand. You got to have a multifactorial strategy for doing this. And you also remind us that there are multiple stressors in our lives. You've described some big ones there. Threats to your own health and the threats to your loved ones are some of the most stressful things that you can go through. And you pile that on top of other things, and you can't help but have increased stress. So I appreciate you describing that. It's important.
We have three more. Anne says, thank you for sharing all the feelings that we have all experienced. This community sharing makes one feel less isolated and lost.
Thank you.
Mike says, I miss travel. The child has had trips to Disney and Hawaii canceled. I was responsible for hundreds of employees until I retired. I work in the basement now.
I wish in so many ways that we were still meeting personally, because those are the kinds of things that we talk about before and after the meetings, and that's part of the bonding here. Even if everything was hunky-dory, the process of retiring, is not an easy one. Mine was lessened because I never really retired from work. I kept working, and continue to do it. That's an important thing for me, and I love it. But for people who go from high stress, high responsibility positions to little responsibility, little structure in your time, is as good as the world has told us that is. It ain't so good sometimes. It doesn't feel good
Now, Ron,
sometimes.
Now, Ron says some of the stress seems to come from those around us who are unable to accept this temporary pause in our lives. He talks about lots of negative behaviors. He's talking inconsiderate, self-centered actions, and it's hard to feel optimistic when there are many that are so self-destructive and inconsiderate. And I see that a lot too, Brian. I see it on both sides, where I see an extreme on one side and an extreme on the other, and I try to put myself in the middle. But comment on Ron, but how do we deal with hearing doom and gloom and then hearing the other people say, "Oh, well, it's all fake."
Well, that's a challenge. There's no magic wand for that, and I think all of us, struggle with. Don and I were just talking today that it's one of the things that we have such a hard time understanding, and I'm not going to take sides on this, but that people can see the same behavior, they can see the same thing and interpret it so differently, diametrically differently. And I'm not sure I understand that. I got some insights, but I don't want to take that time here. But I mean, that's a puzzlement, and that bothers me because, of course, I think I'm right, or I wouldn't hold the position. So, what I have, I can just tell you what I've done is to realize that that's there, that I can and need to sometimes challenge that. I've said things to people, who aren't wearing masks in places where masks are required. I'm not going to get in an argument or a fight with them. I'm going to walk away if it gets ugly, but something in me sometimes just won't let me walk by. Everybody has to decide, where those lines are. The bigger challenge for me is in my own family, where different family members have very different perspectives, particularly politically, but in a lot of things. And how do you deal with that? How do you maintain family closeness in the face of that? And that has been a struggle. It's been a struggle for both Donna and myself. And I have made a commitment to myself that so far, at least, and I can't promise the future, so far I have made a very conscious, firm decision not to let these kind of conflicts, particularly political conflicts, damage my family. My family is the most important thing to me in the world, and I'm not going to allow the extent that I have any control of it, for those kinds of things to break down the most important relationships in my life. And I'll bite my tongue, I'll walk away, I'll avoid it, but I'm not going to engage in that kind of dialogue and anger-laden discussion that's going to create more stress for my family. It creates stress to walk away, to remain silent, but to me, that's has the far less potential for damage than engaging in these kinds of things that really I can see no positive outcome. So, right. For what it's worth, we're struggling with the same thing.
Kind of like I said earlier, and I've noticed it as well. I mean, these people are either your family, they may have been your friends since school, and they're good people. They want the best for our country, for ourselves, and our children and our future. But it's just a different opinion. And we used to have that, Brian. We used to have it where I didn't understand a different opinion, and I would be able to post about it. And it would be good discussion. And now I'm not picking sides. This is everybody. And now we've seemed to have lost the ability to rationally tell why we think this is the way without saying your way is wrong and pointing fingers and poking people.
Yeah, and I think social media has exacerbated the problem because now we don't have to face people with our positions and see their faces and see how it reacts, see how we react, see how people react in real time to us. There's a barrier, there's an insulation between to the consequences of our words. And I think social media has really exacerbated that problem. Just as an aside, if you want to watch a really interesting movie on Netflix, there's a movie called The Social Dilemma that talks about the impact of social media on the country, on the world. It's an excellent movie, thought-provoking.
Wow. We have one more comment, then we'll let you get back to it. Kathleen says she loves the discussion. This is the first time she's taken part in an open discussion about how hard this time is. Thank you.
Thank you.
And when you're ready to go on to your presentation.
Okay, I'm ready. If you want to bring that
we're up.
Back up. Okay, thank you. So now now the beef, the promise content. What does all this mean for photography? I want to go back to that first, I guess the second or third slide that I put up, but change the content a little bit and kind of raise some of the questions in each of those domains that may impact on photography. When you get into disorders or pre-existing or emerging disorders impacting our approach to photography. You know, we've talked about feeling more depressed. Some of us may have actually developed a clinical depression in this. You know, I'll just tell you as an aside, I have been asked for referrals for people more in the last 4 months than I probably have been in the last 4 years. People are needing help and needing clinical help. So, you know, and when you have these kinds of adverse reactions, I think it's hard to imagine that it wouldn't impact every corner of our lives, including photography. So the health risk behavior has our approach to photography reduced or increased our health risk behaviors? Are we able and willing to go out and do the shooting that we used to do? Have we done more inside still life kinds of things as a way to protect ourselves? Has this changed the way we approach photography in terms of what we are interested and comfortable and willing to do? And I have never participated much in the activities of the club beyond on the meetings, but you know, has this experience made people more or less willing to go out in some of the group exercises? I don't know. I don't have visibility on that. Distress reactions impacting your photography. Are you too tired to do it? Is this the thing in your day or your week that gives you some joy and creativity? Has there been any impact from and on those distress reactions? And have we found ways to use photography as a resilience tool? So I thought it might be helpful to go back to those things we first talked about and just ask the question in the context of photography. Again, before we get into a larger discussion, I can share with you some of my experiences in this. I've found that I've had less interest in photography. And I'm not sure I fully understand all of that. I think part of it is the low energy. Part of it is that I'm easily distracted by other things. I'll set out saying, "Oh, I'm going to do some printing today," and I just never get around to it. And for me, one of the big factors has been distraction and by other competing priorities. I've talked about my work, and that has taken up a lot of my time. That's probably the major factor. But I'm also in the process of doing a music CD. The cover of that is what's on the slide. It actually is in production right now. Um, but that's been about a year's work for me, and doing that. And I'm collaborating with a singer, songwriter, producer from Nova Scotia, J.P. Cormier. That's why it says the Cormier Sessions down there. But I've put a lot of work into that, and that does involve some photography. Some of my photographs are in the booklet that goes with the CD. And I especially wanted to put this up there because this cover photograph was taken by our own Chip Bulgin. He was kind enough to have a photo session with me at his studio. Many of us have been there, and the cover photo comes from that, as well as a couple of other photos within there. So again, it's an example of the kind of collegiality and mutual help that occurs in this club. Again, just as an aside, as you may remember, last time I did a presentation, I offered some of my books for sale after that, and gave a major piece of the sales back to the club as a contribution. I want to find a way to do that with this CD. I'm not quite sure how we're going to do it in this virtual environment, but it probably isn't going to be released until maybe Thanksgiving. But it's been frustrating. It's been exciting, but it has been a distraction to photography for me. Regarding the club, I haven't been participating in these meetings. I just find this format to be less gratifying than the personal ones. I'm sure we all do. But for me, it was just enough that it has kept me away. I love the competitions, but for whatever reason, I'm not in the mood to compete now. Again, I'm not sure I fully understand that, and that also has made me feel guilty. This club has given so much to me that I feel like I've kind of abandoned it. And I feel guilty about that because I enjoy it so much, have enjoyed it so much, and I will be back to it. But it's at least part of a true stating of my experience. On the other side of it, I've found that when I do engage in photography, I say, why don't I do this more often? I'm reminded every time I do that of how much I enjoy it, whether I'm shooting, whether I'm printing, whether I'm just doing post-processing. I love it. And every time I do it, I say to myself, why don't I do this more? Or why am I so reluctant to do it? So again, that's been kind of my experience about doing photography. So what I'd like to do now is kind of lead us back into the discussion mode and ask, how has the current situation influenced your interest in and willingness to engage in photography? Is your energy and motivation increased, decreased? And how are you expressing your passion for photography? New images or reprocessing old things, the competition, the club involvement. And one of the things that I'd be very interested in is how are you doing this? Are you finding yourself doing this more alone, needing a group to do it with? Are you focusing outside, inside? I'd love to hear a discussion about how you think the current situation has impacted on your doing photography. So with that, we'll take the slides down again and continue the discussion.
Okay, Brian, I have you on the side in a little window. That way we have
Okay.
that way we still have your
Great.
question up. If everybody can give us some information on that. How has the current situation influenced? I know we've had a lot of members that have tried shooting different things. We've had a lot of photo assignments that people seem to really enjoy. New gear. Let's get some interesting interactions going in chat. Speaking of interaction, Mike says we all miss the weekly in-person interactions.
Yeah, I know I'm not the only one.
Yeah. We'll hold out for just a little bit.
I've had an occasion or two, from time to time to run into people in the club in person. And I'm so excited when that happens. And it's hard to pull away. We wind up talking longer than we should because we're making up for lost time. And it's just, it's diagnostic, I think, of the value that so many of us find in that informal chit chat interaction with people who share a passion.
Right. Mary Lou is saying she does not have audio. Mary Lou, I just checked the back end, and we're doing okay for audio. If someone can just give us an audio check to make sure we are still good to go. And while we do that, Rich says the audio is fine. I think that might be on your side, Mary Lou. Double check that. Kathleen says she's lost interest in doing photography, yet she loves to study others' work.
Do you have any? I know you're a person of deep thought and insight. Do you have any ideas why that might be?
That's interesting. Mike says alone mostly, macro, tabletop, jealous of the photographers who are brave enough to photograph people in person. Super zoom lens, right, Mike? Ron says the weekly in-person meetings gave us the opportunity to talk to each other and enjoy our friendships. I learned from everyone else. While I am happy to tune in weekly to a broadcast, it's not a conversation. It's not. That's true.
Yep.
I will say one thing about the Facebook group, though. People have been sharing more of their work in Facebook. And as much as I want to say that everyone is nice to everybody, everybody kind of had their own little cliques almost. And I like the Facebook chat because it seems like everyone's talking to everyone. So I think that's good, and I hope that continues once we meet in person again. Susan says, actually Bob says, the large pond next to our house has had a nearly year-long overhaul, just completed. I made weekly or twice weekly forays to document the ongoing process, shared most of the images on the neighborhood Facebook page, enjoyed keeping others up to date with visual images of the progress. Yeah, Bob's collection on that. I'd like to see him make a community coffee table book or something. Mary Lou says,
finding ways. People are finding ways.
Yeah. Mary Lou says the weekly meetings and competition really pushed her. Actually, that was not past tense. The weekly meetings and competition really pushed her. I hope that's still going on, Mary Lou. Greg says, I'm trying to learn off-camera flash and the Nick apps. Emphasis on trying.
If my experience is any indication, that's something you never stop learning. And it's a steep curve.
Kathleen says, general loss of interest. Yeah. And she was the one that mentioned that she's lost all interest in photography, yet she loves watching everyone's work.
Yeah.
Fred says, is there a way to get us all live video and audio? Unfortunately not, Fred. Not without either paying a lot of money and having a bunch of people going in there. Not to mention we can keep things a lot higher quality this way. And I think we're doing a pretty good job at getting everybody's questions and comments over here. Kathy says I've spent way more time in my own backyard shooting. I found myself having to explain to my brand new neighbors why I have a camo tent pop up in the yard, as well as a rotting log and a Christmas tree stand to create a more natural background. Wow.
There's actually some entertainment value in terrifying the neighbors.
She goes on to say the absence of travel has limited her shooting, but she's so grateful for John hosting the virtual meetings. Oh, thank you, Kathy. It was either do that or nothing, and I'm sure anybody would have done that. Mary Lou says she's inspired by the meetings and challenges still going forward. Good.
Good.
Greg says he scanned about 5,000 slides and old photos and then found that he needs a bigger coffee table.
New hard drives. If there aren't other things to be said, maybe we can move on.
We have one more. We have one more from Rich. Rich says he's given up on all of the major trips for the time being, also given up on weekend trips that we were taking, but we do go out about once a week to local places within 1 to 1.5 hours drive. We stick to places where there are not in crowds and try to take lots of photos in the evening golden light. I'm also spending a lot of time organizing old photos into electronic albums. Rich did a great presentation last week on how he does that.
Good.
Or was that 2 weeks ago? Let's see. Making sure we have one more actually from Julie. I have had competing priorities with our move and new house. I mostly grab the camera to shoot wildlife I see out the window.
Competing priorities.
Yes.
Hard to compete with a move.
Okay, I think we're all caught up, Brian.
Okay, why don't we go back to the? Can I just change it from here now?
You can. We're full screen now.
Okay, great. So again, as I said in the beginning, we might think about how what we shoot has changed, and we've already covered this. So this one can be quick. Again, and the pattern we've had before is I'll share my experience. Part of my reduced interest is because of the lack of travel. No Campobello Island this season. And I find myself in a less target-rich environment here. Now, that said, I'll tell you that I think that's bullshit, that it reflects a lack of my own creativity and energy. There is plenty to shoot around here. It's just that on this island in the Bay of Fundy, everywhere you go, it's easy. There's so much to shoot there that I've gotten lazy and complacent, and I feel badly that I feel that this is a less rich environment, because it's a very rich environment. The problem is mine. It's not the environment. I've also found that what I do is a little bit different. I'm doing more post-processing and printing and less shooting. I've gone back with some of my images and tried different versions of them, played with them a little bit. Donna and I have been, she had a number of images that she really wanted to make large prints out of to frame. And so we've been doing that together. And again, it's one of those experiences. I said, why don't I do this more often? It's a wonderful interaction with her. It's a creative process, to change the images and to see which is best. And, given the goal for a certain image, as soon as I do that, I said, wow, why am I not doing this every day? And I've also changed the focus a little bit. I'm finding that I'm shooting more family than I did before. Like most of us, we become the de facto family photographers because we have an interest in some skills in it. But that has become a major part of my work, and I think that's because I see less of them now. It's not we don't drop by anymore. One of my children has moved a little bit further away, so that's not as easy. So I value the times we get together as a family, and so I do more shooting of that. And I also am doing more occupational work, which I'll tell you about. Just to give you some examples of that, these are some of the family pictures just recent ones that just are kind of examples of how uh, what I've been doing and why it's so important to me. The one in the upper left is my daughter and grandson and son-in-law. He's in the Air Force and assigned to Air Force One, and he wanted to be able to document uh, the Air Force One experience when his son was a toddler. So he asked me if I'd be willing to come out to Andrews and do some shots of the family in front of the plane. And so this is one that I did. And again, it's not just a nice family thing. It's something for the family legacy. So that's part of why I'm motivated. And the one in the upper right, my grandson Evan at his second birthday party, and you'll recognize Donna in the lower left, and my daughter Allison in the lower right here. So again, a focus on family. Um, when I did the last presentation, I talked about using photography in my work. It's not infrequent. I try when I do presentations to have images in there, and it kills me when I have to use a stock image. And I try very hard to use as many of my own images as I can in my work. We also put out an annual report every year, and I contribute a number of images to that annual report. So it's a way for me to link my interest in photography to my primary occupation. The bottom picture is one that was in an annual report a while ago. We have major laboratories that we run where we do bench research. A lot of our work is done with military families and grief and mortuary affairs workers. And so the image at the top is from Arlington that I took. So those are some historic images. Pretty early in the process, I did this one. One of the things that we do a lot is provide fact sheets on psychological issues of a whole lot of different areas. And I developed this one to go in some of our team's presentations, and I'm probably going to redo it a little bit. I'm not completely happy with it, but I've been doing a series of these that can be used occupationally. And again, just as an aside, we've touched on a lot of issues today tonight that my center works in, and we have these 2-page fact sheets on lots of topics, many of which we have already discussed today: healthcare workers, parenting, those kinds of things. So if you go to csts.org, you can see all of our fact sheets, and they just may be of interest or help to you. So thought I would add that. For me, also, as I said, the subject matter has changed. So what I would like to do now is have a bit of a discussion on, has what you shoot changed? Have you had new or changed interests from what you used to shoot? If we could bring up the other screen, John, that would be great.
Okay, you're up again.
Okay.
We'll give a couple seconds for everyone to give us a little bit of insight on these two questions.
I know Mike said he's done more inside work, more still life kinds of stuff. The neighboring pond.
Bob and Susan in their pond as well. We've gotten more in the dark room, so a lot of things that were kind of on the back burner. Projects that I've been really interested in, that I've been talking about for a dozen years plus. I'm finally touching again. Mary Lou says she's working with a lot of tabletop. JC says he's grateful for the local wildlife refuge where he can drive through and shoot from his car window or walk some of the trails and get great shots. The
And probably
image,
not run into a lot of other people.
right? The images I get will probably not win any contest. Well, we know that's false, JC.
Yeah,
But he really enjoys them.
modesty.
Mary Lou's learning a lot of Photoshop. Great.
Can you do a Vulcan mind meld with me?
Any other information out there? Any other thoughts on this? Has anybody's interest changed as Brian's got up there? What about you, Brian? What has changed for you in photography when you actually get out there and do it?
Well, again, the subject matter has changed. I'm getting out there less, doing more inside, but it's been hard for me because I don't. Uh, I just don't, because of the safety issues. I just don't go outside a lot. I don't go to the places I used to go, and again, it's not, I'm not a victim here. You know, part of this is my own inability or unwillingness or lack of creativity to make opportunities for myself. And I think if there's an outcome of this discussion, you all have inspired me again. You've given me new impetus to get out there and do more, and stop wallowing.
Susan says she's still such a novice, but she hasn't tired of any particular subject. Susan, I don't think you're a novice, Susan, but that's good that you still love shooting everything that you love shooting. Fred says he's still shooting in studio, but they're limiting the amount of people. Kathy has traded her camera. She hasn't traded her camera, but she's bought a sewing machine. As long as you keep that camera, Kathy. And she's been teaching her granddaughters how to sew.
Great.
Nell says, I've started to take and edit more photos on his phone. I've started to hike more, so portability has been a concern. Oh, yeah.
Well, that's an interesting observation. If Donna was here, she's actually in New Jersey because she wanted to avoid my presentation. But she is shooting much more with her camera, and she is getting some amazing results. She has the latest iPhone, and I'm just amazed. And as somebody who carries around tens of pounds of stuff at minimum, it's sobering.
Ron says he shot some local stuff, mostly boring, lack of interest, but he's gone back and rediscovered some images he previously tossed aside and finding some good pieces worthy of revisiting in Photoshop. Great.
Good.
Susan says she appreciates having the competition themes and photo assignments as an incentive. Fred says shooting at Fort Meade with little or no people.
Mm-hmm.
And Chuck says...
Fred, by the way, after talking with you, I bought the big Sony lens.
Nice.
I blamed you for it when I had to tell Donna.
Chuck says he's gotten a bit more into video. I'd love to talk to you about that, Chuck. Love doing the video. Past trips and grandchildren. I always stayed away from video because I wasn't I was too shaky. I wasn't steady enough. But now those cameras have that stability, which is really nice. Rich says he spends a lot of time watching YouTube videos of landscape photography bloggers. They go to interesting places that they give lots of good ideas about composition and other factors. Rich, can you make a post on the group and share some of your favorite YouTube vloggers, photography vloggers? That'd be great to see. JC says, I started out wanting to do landscape and wildlife, big wildlife. With limited travel, I am now thinking about nature and close-up. Julie says she joined an iPhone photo group on Facebook to get some tips using her phone. Fred has laughed at you in the comments and asked you how you like it so far.
So far, so good.
Bob says,
I actually, Fred, I took it to Fort Meade to do the Air Force One shots, and by the time the plane was taking off and the president was arriving, it was drizzling and it was dark, and so the lens did fine, but I didn't get great images because the ISO had to be so high. And I got out to the flight line, and the Air Force had given me permission to set up my tripod to do that. And as soon as I completed doing that, the Secret Service came over and told me I had to take my tripod down. So I had to handhold it. So it was a real challenging environment.
Bob says he's been doing panoramas with his cell phone of everyday stuff with some success. And let's see. And then there's a couple comments on those YouTube video photography vloggers. I think we're ready to move on.
Okay. So this really is the last slide to prompt our last discussion here, and that was, what does all this mean for our photography moving forward? And I thought we might, pick among these topics to discuss further is, what strategies, if any, have any of you developed to keep your passion and activity and interest alive? The other thing I've been thinking about, is there an opportunity to document history here and to bear witness? This is a time that, like so many times in our lives, that is different than any other that we've experienced. And as I said early, it will end. And probably, I'm old enough at this point that I'm not going to see this, but future generations, or at least the next generation or two, are going to hear stories about this and look back. And I have been wondering to myself, are there ways that I might start documenting this? I haven't really thought that through very much, but to bear witness to history here. So maybe some of you have some thoughts on that. And then, we've touched on this already some, is how can we overcome some of the psychosocial obstacles to enhance our experience? And as I thought about that, I thought, well, there may be ways of helping ourselves, inspiring ourselves to shake off the low energy or the anhedonia or something to help ourselves during this situation, and use photography to do that. I think, as I said, as soon as I get into it, I say, why am I not doing this every day? So I got to keep reminding myself of that. And then, are there ways that we can help others, our friends, our family, our community, and other photographers? And I think the discussion so far tonight has shown me that this group is rich in its wealth for its ability to be able to help other photographers and help each other. I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and it sounds like it may have been interesting and helpful to others. So that's really the last slide I have, and glad to end up the discussion on hearing some of your thoughts about those things.
Okay, I've got you full screen again, Brian.
Okay.
Scott says he's tried to make himself look around the condo and see photographs. He finds it boring. I need to be following my nose, wondering what's over the next hill, taking time to study what attracts me, stare at a discovery. Since retirement, he has expanded his vision a bit because he no longer has a format to fit into. He says, I am not illustrating stories written by other people. I still shoot film, and I didn't know that, Scott. And I enjoy digitizing it for prints. I have not figured a way to get out and work safely. Mary Lou says, I look at great photos on the internet that get me up and out of the house. We don't have any more yet, but we'll get some more comments coming in.
I'm really challenging myself to because I just kind of came up with this notion fairly recently about, do I have an opportunity to document history? And I'm not sure whether it's the Scott is Scott Dines or not, but that's how he made his living.
That is Scott Dine. Yes,
And
Scott is with us.
I'm sorry?
Scott is Scott Dine. Scott is with us.
Okay, great. Well, Scott, you've spent a lifetime doing this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about how we might do that, because I think it's important to do. And part of my recognition of the importance of documenting history has been through my relationship with you, which I'm particularly sad not to be in contact.
And that's kind of important because Christine and I studied photographic history back during the Civil War.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't for the photography back then, there was so much about life and living during that time that we wouldn't know. It was taken for granted and we didn't write it down.
Yeah.
So that's really important.
Yep.
You may think it's boring. You may think it's morbid to photograph you, your friends, or your family kind of just barely getting by, but this is your life and this is what we're living through. Let's see. Kathy says, since there will be no school pictures, she plans to do a school picture day for her granddaughters and their neighbors.
That's cool.
Susan says there are places in Central Maryland where you can drive and find a lesser used park to enjoy being outdoors. Even being out early morning, you can get somewhere and avoid people. And that's what we've been trying to do. We've been trying to not only Kinder Farm Park, but one of our other favorites is Lake Waterford. We just had that last Saturday, I believe. And it's such a wide open park. And we all come to photograph. But the thing is, we all sit there and enjoy each other's company so darn much. Kathleen says, thank you for allowing us to have this discussion this evening and for you leading the discussion. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it. And you all have your comments and willingness to share really has inspired me to kind of shake the funk and move on. I appreciate that.
Brian, is this something that we can start another discussion, maybe a post on our Facebook group, and maybe continue this discussion? I don't know how we can do it, but maybe we can help out. Everyone's been so great to help out each other. Maybe maybe keep this discussion on thinking what you're going to do, what you need to do, and as always, we just help each other get through it. But maybe that's something that we can continue to do to help the mental stability of everybody. Ron says he's been privileged to judge several photo contests lately, which have given him exposure to some great works from other clubs and to work on understanding elemental impact and understanding of his own work. Been a lifesaver for him to stay engaged and grateful for conversations with Fred and Scott on photography.
Great.
Perfect. And thank you, Kathy. Kathy is just saying that everybody, and it's she says John, Christine, and Michelle, but everybody. It's not just us. It's all of your officers deserve a big round of applause. Great people like Brian willing to step up and share their expertise. And I've always said that all of our club members have something very interesting and something they do very well. And if we all could just teach one program, that would be we'd have years of programming. Mary Lou, thanks everybody again. Brian, I think that might be it, unless you have something in closing.
Okay. No, I don't. Thank you again, John, for hosting this and solving all the technical problems. And as I said, I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm grateful that you gave me the opportunity to do this.
Well, that's all you and Christine. Christine had to work today, unfortunately. So thank you to Christine for getting in touch with you, and you guys working this out for such a great presentation. Brian, I want to thank you for joining us this evening with such a positive and thought-provoking discussion, as well as everyone who joined us and contributed their own stories and experiences. Our next meeting is Wednesday, October 7th, and that's our first photo assignment on the topic of your favorite drink. And we still could use some more submissions, and you have until midnight tonight to get them to programs at arundelcameraClub.org. While we're asking for photo submissions from everyone, and we will show those next week, paid members will have their photos placed in a gallery where the highest liked photo will win a certificate. Look for that information tomorrow. Thanks again for joining us tonight, and we'll see everyone next week. Good night.
Night.